Chapter 22, September 27th, 1793. Yesterday, the worst day yet. Even those who are not sick have eyes tinged with yellow. More doctors are ill and dying. Dr. Benjamin Rush, letter 1793. It all hit me at once. My fears about mother, the fever, Bush Hill, watching grandfather die, being scared alone and hungry. I cried. I cried a river, and poor Eliza did her best to comfort me. The kinder her words, the harder I cried. When I finally paused to catch my breath, she had one question. Why aren't you with your mother at the farm? What do you mean? I asked. Mother didn't come to the farm with us. We never got there. Oh, dear, said Eliza. She looked around at the deepening shadows. We can't stay here. You are coming with me to my brother's. You can tell me what happened as we walk. Eliza pulled her companion aside and spoke quietly. The woman looked at me with an arched eyebrow and walked away. Am I taking you away from your work? I asked. Do you need to help your friend? It's time for all of us to be safe at home, said Eliza. She pulled a roll from her basket. Is this little one hungry? Nell snatched the roll without a word and took a huge bite. That's a good answer, said Eliza. She laid her hand on Nell's forehead and neck. I don't think she has the fever, I said. I hesitated. I didn't want Nell to hear me discuss her mother. She's alone. Eliza nodded. We have to hurry, she said. Do you want me to carry her? Nell tensed and locked her arms around my neck. I would have gratefully delivered to her, Eliza, but I didn't think my neck would survive. I'm fine, I lied. Eliza led me down back streets as I briefly explained what had happened since grandfather and I left the coffee house. I skipped the hardest part, being alone with grandfather's body, lying in Bush Hill, the robbers. I didn't want to cry in front of Nell. Eliza didn't say anything, just shook her head and hurried me along until we reached the narrow street where she lived. Her brother Joseph was a cooper. He made barrels, a good trade. Eliza lived with Joseph's family in a small apartment above the cooperage. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs. I had to know. I covered Nell's ears. Where's mother? She's dead, isn't she? She's dead, and you're trying to shield me from it. Eliza put a hand on her back and stretched. No, no, she's not dead. Don't think that for a minute. Last I saw her, she was recovered from the fever and bent on following you to the farm. The knot at the base of my neck loosened. I must go there then. I have to find her, Eliza. Hush. You can only climb one mountain at a time. Come upstairs and eat some dinner. We'll think better with full bellies. I promise I'll tell you all I know. She led me up the stairs to a small set of rooms, dimly lit but clean smelling and orderly. Joseph's wife died last week, Eliza whispered as we paused in the doorway. He mourns her something terrible. He is still in bed recovering. He's weak, but he'll survive. Thank the Lord the boys haven't taken ill. Plump cheeked twins stormed Eliza as soon as she crossed the threshold. These are the boys. She hugged them tightly before disentangling herself from four arms. We have company, she said. This is Maddie, my friend from the coffee house, and Maddie's little friend Nell. Maddie, this is Robert, and this is William. The boys peered shyly at me. They hid their faces in Eliza's skirts. Nell mimicked them, hiding her face in my neck. If I didn't set her down soon, my arms were going to snap off at the shoulder. Is that you, Eliza? A tiny woman leaning on a cane slowly made her way into the room. Snow colored hair framed a deeply lined face the color of aged mahogany. She looked to be the oldest person I had ever seen. The woman walked straight to me and poked my arm. Who's this? She demanded. As Eliza explained, the old woman harumphed and snorted. So, you've got to feed them too? She asked. No, ma'am. Eliza doesn't have to feed me, I protested, although that's exactly what I was hoping Eliza would do. We came across each other in the course of our errands. I'll need to go home soon. And Nell? I wasn't sure how to end that sentence. The old woman shook her head. You don't leave until you've eaten. I've seen brooms with more meat on them. The stew is hot, Eliza, and you'll still have bread and turnips. I'll come home. I'll come again in the morning. She turned in the doorway and pointed a finger twisted with work and age at the boys. No trouble from you two. Let your papa sleep and mind Eliza, and I'll send a ghost after you. The boys stared with wide eyes and nodded. The old woman chuckled as she walked out, her cane heavy on the floor. I'll stop by tomorrow. We'll see if the wagon from Litzitz comes on time. Never thought the day would come I wished I worked a farm again. Her voice faded as she made her way down to the street, one slow step at a time. The boys stared at the closed door. That was Mother Smith, Eliza told me. Don't worry, children, she won't send any ghosts. Who wants to help me with Papa's supper? The stew in the kettle was made for 4, not 6. Eliza ladled out a full portion into my bowl, but I poured half of it back. I don't need all of this, Eliza. The boys should eat so they don't take sick. Eliza looked at me closely. She said. Could be you're right. She took a bowl of soup and to her brother Joseph and left me at the table with the children. Nell let me unwind her from my neck when she realized a bowl of soup was for her. She sat on my lap and stared at Robert and William. They slurped up their soup and stared back. I thought they might be close to the same age. A plan began forming in my head, but I quickly shushed the thought. I didn't have time to dream or plan. I would deal with each hour as it came, one step at a time. The bustle of the family's evening, clearing away, washing up, getting the boys ready for bed, pushed away all thoughts of the fever for a few hours. Nell fell asleep in my lap shortly after dinner and didn't wake when I laid her on a soft quilt that Eliza spread on the floor. When the boys were finally asleep and Joseph was resting comfortably, Eliza set 2 chairs by an open window, handing me a mug of lemonade, and motioned for me to sit down. Matilda Cook, it is time for the truth. You stay right there on that chair until you tell me what happened. Everything. I never could keep anything from Eliza. The story slid out with all the details being abandoned on the road, struggling to care for grandfather, getting the fever, the garden, the intruders, grandfather's death. Talking about him brought back the tears. I did everything wrong, Eliza. I couldn't make a decent meal for grandfather. I knew he wasn't well. His face was so red. I should have done something, chased the intruders out, or better yet, not been such a baby and left the shutters open just because I was hot. It is all my fault. Eliza handed me a clean handkerchief and patted my hand until my sobs quieted. Your grandfather was a wise man. You couldn't have saved him, Maddie. It was his time. I sniffed and took a shaky breath. What happened after he died? She asked. I filled in the rest of the story quickly. This strange day that began with a burial and ended with a homeless child in my arms. Eliza watched Nell sleeping. She lay curled on her side, clutching her headless doll. You understand that she needs to go to the orphan house, don't you? You should probably go there yourself. My stomach tightened. Please, Eliza, don't make me go. I know you think I'm a child, bigger than Nell, but a baby still, and that I need someone to tell me to wash my face and finish my bread. I struggled to control my voice. I'm not. I'm not a little girl. I can take care of myself. We'll talk about it in the morning. We'll talk about everything in the morning. Eliza rubbed her shoulders and stretched her neck. Do you feel ill? Do you want to lie down? I asked. I'm just tired and I can't sleep yet. A woman's work is never done. Isn't that what the fools say? Here. She pulled a small chair of pants out of a basket at her feet and rummaged for a needle and spool of dark thread. Robert and William are harder on their clothes than any dock worker I've ever seen. Stitch up the rips while I try to put this shirt back together. I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what I've been doing. I bit off a length of thread and slid it through the eye of a needle as Eliza talked. A few weeks ago, Dr. Benjamin Rush wrote to Reverend Allen asking for help. Reverend Allen from the Free African Society, the same. The doctors thought us Africans couldn't get yellow fever. Reverend Allen said that was a chance for black people to show we are every bit as good and important and useful as white people. The society organized folks to visit the sick, to care for them, and bury them if they died. Eliza's voice drifted off as she caught a memory. She took a deep breath and picked her sewing up again. Is that why you were visiting those homes this morning? Eliza nodded. Yes, Mother Smith takes my place minding the boys and Joseph. The society has done a remarkable job, and I don't mind saying that with pride. The Africans of Philadelphia have cared for thousands of people without taking notice of color. If only the doctors had been right, we could look to these days of suffering as days of hope. I stuck the needle in my thumb. What do you mean, if only the doctors had been right? Eliza held the shirt up to the light to check the evenness of the stitches. After a few weeks of nursing the sick and burying the dead, our own people started to sicken. Black people can get sick with yellow fever just like white people or Indians. I do know some who have never been sick, but there are white people who can say the same thing. We stitched in silence, each deep in thought. Are we going to die, Eliza? I asked finally. Eliza snorted. That's foolish talk. I'm not going to die. I have too much work to do. Mother Smith there, she won't go until she's ready, and the Lord Himself asks for the pleasure of her company. Don't listen to words of despair, Mattie. You must be strong and have faith. When will it end? For everything there is a reason. Remember? When the frost comes, the fever will vanish. We just have to find a way to make it until then. Chapter 23, September 28th, 1793. There is great distress in the city for want of cash. Friendship is nearly entirely banished from our city. Dr. Benjamin Rush, letter 1793. Small children can give off powerful smells, particularly small children who don't know how to wake at night and use the chamber pot. When I woke on the quilt next to Nell, I smelled her, then realized she was soaking wet. I was merely damp. Eliza shook her head and chuckled. Babies are the same, no matter what the color. You might as well wash the twins' bedding. They have a similar problem. There wasn't room in the small apartment to wash, so I scrubbed the quilt and blankets in the courtyard behind the cooperage. Robert, William, and Nell sat on a log and watched me, solemn as three old preachers. By the time the blankets were drying and I washed the three smelly children, Eliza had gone out to care for the sick and Mother Smith had taken control. Mother Smith tapped her way around the room with her cane, circling me like a hawk. She made me rewash the breakfast dishes with near boiling water and complained that I left too much dirt behind when I swept. She snorted when she saw me stitching. Wow, sorry. She cackled out loud when I tried to comb the knots out of Nell's hair. Too bad my mother never met Mother Smith, I thought as I beat a rug for the third time in the courtyard. They would have gotten along famously, complaining about me and out scrubbing each other. She did know how to tell a story. I had to give her that. She sat in Eliza's rocker with the children at her feet and told a tale of magic buckets and flying ships. The children were enchanted. I applied all my force to clean the burned bits from the bottom of the stew pot. Mother Smith hadn't said a word when the stew burned because I forgot to stir it. She didn't have to say a word. The way she lifted her chin as she turned away said everything. I was a complete failure. When the story was over, the boys trundled off to bed without protest. Nell climbed in my lap and fell asleep, sucking her thumb. I worked the knots out of her hair slowly and gently. My stomach rumbled underneath her. I had skipped supper. I figured my portion had been the one with which stuck to the bottom of the pot. Mother Smith pulled her shawl on and prepared to leave. Do you think Eliza is all right? I asked. Shouldn't she have come home before dark? The pain doesn't go away at sundown, Mother Smith said. Eliza will stay where she's needed. Nell stirred and I patted her back. Don't love her, warned Mother Smith. Pardon me? I said, don't you fall in love with that baby girl. She's not yours. You can't keep her. You had any sense, you'd take her right down to the orphan house tomorrow and hand her over. Don't look back. That would be cruel, I said. She needs some time to get over the shock of, you know. I mouthed the words, her mother. Then I'll take her. Mother Smith shook her head. You're not doing her any favors. Fact is, you're making it harder on her. She stays with you, you feed her, wash her, sing to her, mother her, then give her away. How's that going to make her feel? You're the cruel one. Her words dogged me through the night. At first, I tried to ignore them. What did Mother Smith know about Nell or me? We were strangers to her. Nell needed someone to hold her. No one at the orphan house would do that. They'd sit her in the corner and scold her. But Mother Smith was right. I was being selfish, holding Nell close, showing her how to play catch with the twins. I needed her more than she needed me. How long would Eliza keep me? A day, maybe? A week, if I were lucky? She had her own family to worry about. I needed to do right by Nell and go back to my own home. I had my feet under me now. I knew how to walk. One good thing about not being able to sleep was that I remembered to wake Nell and have her do her business in the chamber pot. I was just tucking her in long after midnight when Eliza came home. She was too weary to speak. I rose early and kept the children quiet by serving them breakfast outside. I didn't care if anyone thought it improper. Philadelphia was long past worrying about where children ate their bread, and Eliza needed to sleep. She joined us outside with a cup of tea when she finally woke. I don't know when I last slept so much, she said. Thank you for taking care of the children. She bent over to give Robert and William a kiss. You seem to have the day well in hand, Miss Mattie. She stopped. Nell was tugging at Eliza's dress. What do you want, honeybee? Nell pointed to her forehead. She wants you to kiss her like you did the boys, I said. Eliza's laughter sounded clean and strong. She swooped Nell off the ground and gave her a big hug and kiss on the cheek before setting her on the ground to play with the boys. The three of them were chasing a raggy tailed rooster around the courtyard. I scuffed a pebble across the street. That rooster should be in a pen, I said. He might hurt the children. Nonsense, said Eliza. He won't hurt anything. Why is your face so long? I scuffed another pebble. I need to take Nell to the orphan house. The more I put it off, the harder it will be. Eliza sat on the stoop. Mother Smith has been talking to you. I nodded. She's right. I know she's right, but it's so hard to think about next week or next month. Look at her. She is happy today. I'm happy today. I don't think we're a burden, are we? Eliza shook her head. But but I just can't think about today. I have to look ahead. Even if mother is alive, she won't want another girl child to raise up. She's only just finished with me, and heaven knows that was hard enough. And what if mother isn't alive? I raised my hand as Eliza started to speak. You know it's possible. I've tried to avoid thinking about it, but I can't. In any event, Nell needs to go. I don't want to, but it would be for her better for her. The rooster hopped into the air, flapping his wings and sending feathers everywhere. The children shrieked and ran in circles. Eliza stood up. If you've made up your mind, then we should leave right now. No telling what the future will bring. I'll get my hat. The boys can stay here with Joseph. I felt like a turncoat, a traitor. Nell walked between us for a few blocks, then asked me to carry her. She wasn't over losing her mother. That would take a long time, but she seemed content enough to be with me. I knew Eliza's eyes were on me, but she kept her thoughts to herself. I tried to force my thoughts away from the heartbreak. It was impossible. We walked past blocks of empty houses along streets that felt abandoned. I am not abandoning Nell, I told myself sternly. I'm doing the right thing no matter how much it hurts. The orphan house appeared much too soon. It looked forbidding, though I knew that was nonsense. It was just a joke. Oh, my goodness, sorry. It was just a house, a building for unfortunate children. You are doing the right thing, I told myself. It's best for now. It's best for now. The woman who answered the door held one screaming infant in her arms and had two crying toddlers grabbing at her skirts. I had to shout to make myself heard above the noise. She bounced up and down, trying to quiet the child in her arms while patting the heads of the others. She looked like a carved whirligig toy with six flying arms and a hopping head. I've brought this girl, I began. My throat closed and tears welled up in my eyes. Don't be such a ninny, I scolded myself. Not another one. The woman's eyes widened. Shh, shh. I can't pick you up all at the same time, she said to the crying children, who all needed to blow their noses. She looked at me with desperate eyes. I'm sorry, that was rude. She shifted the baby to her other shoulder. Is that the girl? She motioned toward Nell with her elbow. I nodded. I still couldn't speak. A fever orphan? One more nod. Is there no one who can take her? This house is just bursting with children right now. Mrs. Bowles, she's in charge here. She's meeting with the mayor's committee right now, explaining how we need more space and more money to feed the little ones. One of the children at her feet pushed the other, who exploded into howls. The woman raised her voice to be heard. I told her the mayor's committee should hold its meeting here. Then they'd give us what we need. She bent down and tried to calm the injured child with her free hand. I cleared my throat. You don't have room for more children? This is better than the street, she answered, but we are very crowded right now. That's the truth. We can't send letters to relatives who might want to help because the mail isn't being delivered. She bent down and picked up the toddler who was crying the loudest. She had to raise her voice to be heard over the racket. If you know of anyone who will care for her, then you should take her there. This has become the house of last resort. Nell looked up at me, her eyes as clear as the sky. She trusted me to do what was right for her. I felt the grip on my heart relax. I looked to Eliza. Seems she's better off with you, Eliza noted. I wanted to dance. Thank you, I told the harried woman. Thank you, thank you. Good luck, I mean, best wishes. Goodbye. I dashed down the steps before she could change her mind. Eliza struggled to catch up with me. Slow down, slow down. You'll wear yourself out walking that fast in the heat. I waited for her at the corner. I did the right thing, didn't I? You saw how crowded it is there. They would never comb her hair or tell her stories. She's better off with me, isn't she? Eliza stood with her hands on her hips. We are all better off together. That's what I think. Let's turn here. The street is shaded. The Ogilvies live down here, I said. Do you think they are still in town? I heard a few stories about them, but I don't know if they're true, Eliza said. Tell me, I begged. I have to know. Wait, is it sad? I don't want to know if it's sad. We stopped in front of the Ogilvies' mansion. It was shuttered like the other houses on the street. It seemed like years since Mother and I stood at the front door waiting for the disastrous tea. I turned Nell loose to pick marigolds from the garden. It's a little of both, happy and sad, Eliza said. I moved Nell away from the rose bush. Tell me then. I'll only think about the happy parts. Eliza joined us by the flower beds. The shade felt like silk on my skin. Bees hummed lazily in the distance and swallows swooped overhead. This was how summer was supposed to feel. I could drink it in all day. I don't know if this is true, mind, but I heard this story in the market just a few days after you'd left with your grandfather. The oldest Ogilvy girl, the one who got sick, Colette. Did she die? Worse. What could be worse than dying? You wouldn't think it was worse, but her mamma sure did. Miss Collette came down with an awful case of the fever. You know how they are. They call in the doctor and that doctor, spend money, fuss, and holler. Nothing helps. The girl is burning up. The whole family gathers at her bedside thinking she's going to Jesus when she sits up straight in bed and starts screaming for Louis, Louis. Turns out this Louis is her husband. But wasn't she engaged to Roger Garthing? Uh-huh. And listen, this Lewis was her French tutor. They had eloped just before she got sick, so everyone starts to scream and carry on. The younger daughter has a temper tantrum because it turns out she was sweet on this Frenchie too. The mother faints and their little dog bites the doctor. One is not supposed to laugh at other people's misfortunes, but I could picture the scene in my mind so perfectly. It caused me to laugh until my sides hurt. Oh gracious, I shouldn't. Please tell me no one died. Eliza laughed. Nope. They're all alive and making each other miserable. Too spiteful to die, if you ask me. They moved into some relative's house in Delaware. Poor things, the relatives, I mean. And Louis, the son in law, is with them. I heard Miss Colette sat herself in the middle of the street and refused to budge until her mother agreed that he could come with them. Now stir your bones. That's enough storytelling and idling for one day. She peered down the street. Let's go home. We decided to stay on the cool street as long as we could. Nell skipped between us, seemingly free of worries and concerns. I was going through all the families I knew, trying to think of someone who might want to take in an adorable imp. Trouble was, I had no way of knowing which families still had parents. Nell stooped to pick up a daisy on the sidewalk. She held it up to me with a smile, and I tucked it in her hair. We took another step, and she found another daisy laying on the ground, not growing there. As I stood, puzzling, three daisies floated through the air. Nell put her hands up to catch them and spun around laughing. Eliza, we've had strange weather this summer, but I've never known daisies to fall from the sky. We looked up. The houses around us had their shutters closed. Wait, look there. I pointed to a second-story window. The shutters were open a crack, and an unseen hand was pushing out daisies one by one. Well, I never, began Eliza. Do you think they need help? I asked. They have the strangest way of showing it, answered Eliza. She went up to the front door and knocked. No one came to the door, though we could both hear people moving within and talking. I guess they don't want company. Might as well be on our way. Wait! I looked up and down the street to get my bearings. This is the painter's house. Mr. Peel. You know, the one who gave all those strange names to his poor children, Rubens, Raphael, Rembrandt, and don't know what other nonsense. A daisy fluttered to my feet. Eliza's eyes widened. That boy is apprenticed here, isn't he? She asked. She knew full well the answer. I looked up at the window, the shutter opened a bit wider, and a handful of flowers drifted down. Something fell and crashed inside the house, then the shutter closed quickly. We should leave, advised Eliza. He has a knack for getting in trouble. I slowly helped Nell gather the flowers. I thought I saw a shadow move behind an unshuttered downstairs curtain, a tall, lean shadow. My heart tripped over the thought of Nathaniel Benson, and I smiled in spite of myself. He was alive and still sending me flowers. If I hadn't been carrying Nell, I think I could have skipped all the way back to Eliza's. There was no more talk of returning me to the coffee house or finding a different home for Nell. Joseph and Eliza agreed that I couldn't live alone, not with the deserted streets as dangerous as the crowded sick rooms. We didn't talk about what would happen after the fever. Eliza promised we would find my mother or learn her fate as soon as the epidemic was over. We didn't talk about Nell. We just loved her. 2 days later, Mother Smith sent word that she had to help a family of 8 that had just lost their mother. 8? She's going to take care of 8 children? I was stunned. If Mother Smith put her mind to it, she could take care of 50. I have no doubt about that at all, answered Joseph. He was sitting up at the table and making quick work of the fried eggs and cornbread Eliza set before him. His strength was returning along with his appetite. I took the bread from my plate and broke it into 3 pieces, which I handed to the twins and Nell. Every day, more towns prohibited travel to or from Philadelphia. Even prices higher than any in memory couldn't tempt farmers into the city with fresh food. I tried not to eat more than I absolutely had to. I tightened the drawstrings in my skirts a bit more every morning. I was going to send the old lady home today if she had turned up, Joseph continued. Robert climbed into his lap. I'm strong enough to make my way around the house. Mother Smith doesn't have to worry about us no more. Do you want Mattie to stay with you? Eliza asked as she wiped off William's sticky fingers and held out the rag to her brother. Nell held up her hands for me to clean. I brushed them off on my skirt and stood up to clear away the dishes. There's little enough business right now, Joseph said as he took the rag to wipe jam off Robert's face. I think I can control this terrible trio for a bit. Folks out there need all the help they can get, even if it does come from a skinny white girl. I swallowed hard. Was I really that useless? Joseph laughed at the expression on my face. I'm teasing. You worry too much, Mattie. You're a great help. It was nice to hear him say that. Robert squirmed away from the rag, but his father caught him and cleaned off most of the mess before he set his son on the floor. Robert raced William into the bedchamber. Nell toddled behind them. Eliza dusted the crumbs from the table into her hand. If you don't need her here, then yes, she can be of great help. We need every strong back we can get. She can come with me. Chapter 24, October 1st, 1793. We set out to see where we could be useful. The black people were looked to. We then offered our services in the public papers by advertising that we would remove the dead and procure nurses. Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, a narrative of the proceedings of the black people during the late awful calamity in Philadelphia in the year 1793. The sights and smell of Eliza's patients were no worse than Bush Hill, but I was not prepared for the heartache. Walking into the homes of strangers, sitting on their furniture, and drying the tears of their children was harder than cleaning up the sick. A dying woman in a cot surrounded by strangers was sorrowful, but a dying woman surrounded by her children, her handiwork, the home where she worked so hard left me in tears. We left the house at first light and sometimes did not return until dark. Joseph kept the children busy in his shop and had supper ready for us when we stumbled home. After a few days of coolness, the sun blazed with heat again and the air was thick with moisture and infection. The calendar said October, but it felt like July. Rumors washed over the city. The fever had ended. The fever started again. A shipload of sick people was coming upriver. A cure had been found. No cure was available. An earthquake in the countryside left people saying the end of the world was at hand. The wells had been poisoned. The British were coming. I would have despaired of the hopelessness and confusion. Eliza dismissed the wild tales with a shake of her head. They may be true, she said, but we have work to do. Come now, Mattie. On board our one boarding house facing the Delaware River had a sick sailor in nearly every room. We went from patient to patient, checking their condition and feeding weak broth to those who had the strength to swallow. The sailors babbled in their own languages, afraid to die on the wrong side of the ocean in a world far away from people who knew their names. The vinegar soaked cloth tied around my nose would not shield me from the stench of the dying men who baked in the old house. On our way out, Eliza accepted a basket of dry bread from the woman who ran the boarding house. That's nearly the last of the flour, the woman said. It'll be sawdust after this, just like the war. Sawdust? I asked. You can make bread? It will have some flour in it, Eliza said as she thanked the woman, but the sawdust will stretch the wheat, make it go farther. When your stomach hurts enough, the tongue won't mind the taste. At Barrett's apothecary, Eliza purchased jalap and bohea tea. I walked around the shop while Eliza argued with the owner about his prices. Grandfather used to bring me to Barrett's to buy soft shell almonds and figs from the big barrel. This was the kind of shop I had always dreamed of. Back then, the shelves had been crowded with colored glass jars, wooden boxes, casks, and bags, all labeled with the spidery handwriting of Mr. Barrett. Now they were covered with dust and the shells of dead insects. Eliza finished her purchases, grabbed my hand, and slammed the door behind us. He's a scurrilous dog, that man, she muttered. Why do you say that? He seemed friendly enough, and he has the medicine you needed. The price of the jalap and tea has climbed to the clouds since the fever struck. If he really cared, he would charge a decent price instead of robbing the sick. Pharmacists and coffin makers are the only people who profit from this plague. Don't forget the thieves, I added. Eliza made a noise in her throat and squinted at the house numbers. We are going to number 30, the Sharp family. They could have left for the country long ago, but he's a merchant and didn't want to leave the business. Then a serving girl came down with the fever, and Sharp's wife wouldn't abandon the girl, bless her. What happened? The serving girl recovered, but Mr. Sharp died. His mind went before the end, and he raged throughout the house like a mad bull, destroying all he touched. Mrs. Sharp suffered a mild case, but is back on her feet again. She fears for her son and daughter. They are both ill in bed. Here it is. Eliza headed straight for the stairs that led to the bedchambers overhead, but I stopped in the front hall to stare. The furniture lay in heaps of splintered wood and feathers. A looking glass had been dashed to thousands of pieces, and the gilt frame torn apart. The curtains were torn from the windows, and a door was nearly ripped off its hinges. Mr. Sharp did not go gently to his grave. Stop dwelling, Mattie, Eliza called from overhead. Stoke the fire and set a pot of water to boil. Then come here and fetch these dirty sheets. We spent the day caring for the Sharp children and reviving Mrs. Sharp, who fainted when the doctor bled both children. After the sun had fallen beneath the rooftops, we arrived at the Colbrand house in time to see the body of the last Colbrand taken out to the death cart. Eliza dragged me inside, saying we still had an obligation to wash down the sick room. We closed the door behind us when the western sky was shot through with the last pewter and gold rays of the day. You go on home, Mattie. You need a good meal and a rest, Eliza said. I only have one more house on this list. Tell Joseph that I'll be along just as soon as I'm finished. No, I said firmly. I'm not going anywhere. The work will go faster if you have me there, and you shouldn't walk home alone after dark. Eliza raised an eyebrow. Never knew you'd a took for extra work. Come along then. We walked in silence, east first, then north. I followed closely, not wanting to lose Eliza in the confusion of alleys and shortcuts. I haven't been here before, Eliza said. Another member of the society asked that I stop in before retiring. These women are seamstresses. They live alone. She knocked politely on the peeling door, then entered. The Gundy sisters were both mending. They silently drank their broth and nibbled on the bread. Eliza helped each woman walk to the necessary and back while I aired out their mattresses. We washed the sisters' thin bodies and pulled clean shifts over their heads. One of the women tried to press coins into Eliza's hand, but Eliza politely refused. and put the money back in the sister's shabby purse. My stomach grumbled as we mounted the stairs of the cooperage. I wondered what Joseph had cooked. He didn't have Eliza's cooking skills, but I wasn't fussy. Eliza breathed heavily as she labored ahead of me. How many more days could we carry on like this? The front room was dark except for the flicker of a small fire in the hearth. No supper time smells welcomed us. I looked around for the twins and Nell. A log popped and the sound echoed around the apartment like a gunshot. Joseph sat next to the fire, his face in his hands. He did not look up as we entered. Joseph? Eliza called sharply. Joseph, what ails you? Are you feverish again? Are you chilled? Joseph raised his face to look at his sister. Tears coursed down his cheeks. He couldn't bring himself to speak. Eliza grabbed his shoulders and shook him. What happened? She shouted. Where is Robert? Where is William and Nell? Joseph wiped the back of his hand across his eyes. I stepped back from the sadness in his face. It filled the room and threatened to pull me in. He pointed to the bedchamber. The twins lay next to each other on the bed, their eyes closed. They panted heavily as they had just come in from a romp outside. Nell lay on her pallet on the floor. She was feverish, but slept soundly. Oh, sweet Jesus, not these little boys, cried Eliza. Open that window farther, Maddie. We need some air in here. It's already open all the way, I answered. It can't be, Eliza snapped. It's hot enough to roast a duck in here. She shouldered me aside and pushed up the sash herself. It would go no further. Do you want me to boil water? I asked. Yes. No! Eliza spun so that her skirts flared and clenched her fist against her head. We can't have a fire in here. The boys won't be able to breathe if it gets any hotter. Dear God, why take these children? I promised I wouldn't let them die. I stood in the doorway, not sure what to do next. Joseph hadn't moved from his stool. Robert moaned and reached his arm out until he found William. Eliza sat down and stroked Robert's forehead. She squeezed her eyes and covered her mouth as she struggled to control her anguish. It's cooler up at Bush Hill, I said. They don't have room, Eliza said fiercely. But it's cooler there, I repeated. The rooms have many windows that catch the wind. It's clean, and they have French physicians. Eliza shook her head. We have to do it ourselves. We'll find a way to make them well again. I looked across the small room. The sound of the river came through the tiny window, along with a distant echo of voices. Windows, I thought. Windows in empty rooms, away from the river, away from the worst heat. The coffee house, I cried. Eliza, we'll take them to the coffee house. All right, guys. Ooh, sorry for all my mistakes. You'll find your assignment tomorrow.